finishing up this collection of messages called In a Happy New Year. We kind of have been looking at a foundation for the year and really just taking a few weeks and making ourselves better in preparation for the year. Today we wrap this up. Next week we start our vision campaign and our vision series, and it's going to be fantastic. I cannot tell you how excited I am for next week. This next series and the next few weeks are going to be really, really big for Timberlake and for our church family, for our community. And if I can not simply encourage you, but if I can ask you to commit to the next 6 weeks of church. I know that sounds daunting to some, not to me. I'll be here, but if I can ask you to commit to the next 6 weeks of church, if I can encourage you to be at the next 6 weeks of church, it's going to be great. And I have some things that I want to share and some vision that we're going to cast and move forward as a church and some really, really, really big things that I'm so excited about. And I believe that not only will the church be blessed, not only will good things happen in our church, but I really do believe that you'll be blessed, that you will draw from the next 6 weeks of this message and what's about to happen in our church. That's next week. Make sure that you're here. Bring some people with you. Talk to your family. Make some commitments. Do something different in the next 6 weeks than maybe you would normally do, and it's going to be good. But before we do that, we are finishing up this collection of teachings really about the footprint for our year. The overarching theme of our year. It's been a good couple weeks since we started this whole thing. I don't know how you have felt about it, but I know that I have left convicted and changed each week. And in case you don't know, I leave every week very pleased after having preached to myself, right? The last couple of weeks, not like, man, that guy's good, but more like, man, God is speaking through me, but God is speaking to me as well. And I know in the last couple of weeks, there have been things that I have had to implement in my own life as a result of my own dumb words and causing me to have to change. But it's been fun. It's been good. I hope that you pulled something from it. If you have a Bible, you can flip it open in James chapter 1 and just hold it there for a couple minutes. Kind of our overarching scripture or our key passage for this series that we've kind of commissioned over a year comes from Romans chapter 12. It says, be joyful in hope, patient in affliction, faithful in prayer. The idea is that we are leaning into hope, that we are getting a better understanding of our trials, our affliction, that we're understanding our struggles just a little bit more, and that we're becoming faithful in our communication with God. These are the things that are going to help us move the ball down the field. These are the things that are going to help us progress and build this firm foundation to stand on in 2020. How often in these things, though, do we get stuck? We get stuck because joy can be extremely hard to acquire. We get stuck because nobody wants to be patient through their afflictions or through their struggles. And as a result, we don't lean into prayer. We don't lean into that communication with God. In fact, usually when we get stuck in things, when temptation shows up, when sin shows up, that's when we revert and we draw back from prayer. We step back, we clam away, we avoid prayer, usually out of guilt or shame, a lot of times out of apathy. And really it forces us into these corners. And still, James starts off this letter by saying, consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kind. Consider it pure joy when you face trials. We get stuck and we panic and we freak out. And James says, man, get excited because life is hard, right? It almost seems counterintuitive, but there's a reason that he does it. Here's where I want to land for the next few minutes that we have together. What happens when we get stuck is we look for a way out. And not only do we look for a way out, but ways out begin to present themselves to us. Different ways out begin to present them to us. And our natural instinct is to gravitate towards those ways out, whether good or bad. We cling to a way out when we're stuck. Paul wrote to the Corinthians, he says, no temptation has overtaken you except what is common to mankind. And God is faithful. He'll not let you be tempted beyond what you can bear. But when you are tempted, he'll also provide a way out so that you can endure it. No temptation has overtaken you except what is common to mankind. The Message translation reads it like this. It says, no test or temptation that comes your way is beyond the course of what others have had to face. All you need to remember is that God will never let you down. He'll never let you be pushed past your limit. He'll always be there to help you come through it. James says, first off, this temptation that you're facing, this thing that you're butting up against, is not unique to just you. It's not unique to you. Mankind has faced this temptation before. You're not in a solo boat. I think that so frequently when we face temptation and sin comes up, part of our panic is that we think that we are alone in this. That there's some unique situation and for some reason it's just heavy on me and nobody else understands. But the reality, as Paul says, no test or temptation that comes your way is beyond the course of what others have had to face. And then he goes on, he says, God's not going to let you down. Yes, it's not unique to you. Yes, other people have faced it. It doesn't make it easier for you. Here's the thing. God's not going to let you down. God's going to take care of you. Until we understand this, until we actually fully understand this, we continue this cycle of temptation in our lives that doesn't stop. So as we finish kind of setting up our year with this series, I want to make sure that we're aware. Kind of like we talked about last week. Obviously, we all make mistakes. We all make errors and have faults, and we mess up. We're tempted, but God's not going to leave us in the temptation process so long as we understand that there's a better way out of it. Remember, it's our natural instinct to cling to a way out so long as we understand that God has already said, I'm going to take care of you. I'm going to provide a way out. We look for God's way out. Life gets better. Before we get there, let me ask this question. How do we do better next time? We have these things, we have these faults, we have these mistakes, these errors. We mess up. Temptation shows up. We sin, whatever that looks like. How do we do better next time? Because it is inevitable that there will be a next time. Temptation doesn't stop. Sin doesn't stop. We're not prevented from facing trials and affliction. So how do we do better next time? Here's number one. We recognize the source. We recognize the source. There's a general misconception sometimes that God is a part of the deception. Sometimes we think that God is bringing us temptation, or sometimes we get in this thought process that God is providing the temptation. It's part of the testing process, right? But James goes on in verse 13, he says, when tempted, no one should say, God is tempting me. For God cannot be tempted by evil, nor does he tempt anyone. It does not get more blunt than that. There's this thought process that sometimes we get into that God is providing temptation as part of the testing process, right? Like we're being tested and our tests make us stronger. God is tempting us. But James literally says, no one can say, God is tempting me. Because God can't be tempted and he doesn't tempt anybody else. Once we understand that God is not the source of our temptation, we can begin to realize that God is the opposite of the source of our temptation. God is the champion in our battle against temptation. Pay attention to the things that lead us there. Pay attention to the source. If you're ever in a spot where you think that no one will find out, that's a source. That's a place that you should not be. The secret place is a breeding ground for dangerous things. Proverbs 28 says, he who conceals his sin does not prosper, but whoever confesses and renounces them finds mercy. This entire series has been about people. We've talked about people a lot over the last few weeks. And the reality is that people are safety. People are accountability. We need people in our life that are safe places of confession without condemnation. places of grace and mercy as we fight a battle. And sometimes I feel like when we look at people and we see people's sin and we see their error and their faults, we forget about the fact that they're in a battle. Most believers, most Christians are not simply accepting sin as what it is. This is who I am. Most of them are in a battle. There's something happening. And so when we see people and they're facing something, we need to understand that they're in a battle. And we need people in our life who can help us fight the battle. Here's how we know when it's coming. It's coming in any great season of success. Anytime that we are in a mode or a season of success is a time that we're going to probably face tremendous temptation. Have you ever noticed that? Like, I feel like it's not just when we're successful, it's when we notice that we're successful. When we notice that things are going really, really good is when temptation begins to show up. There have been times in my life where I've literally thought, man, I'm really happy. And then you can almost always guarantee the next day something bad is going to happen, right? Like, it's just the way that it goes. Probably one of the most frequent conversations that I have with people is somebody saying to me, man, life was going so good, and then this happened. That thing happened in my life, and it sidetracked, and it knocked me off course for something that was really, really good. We find temptation when we're in these seasons of success. There's a supernatural force against us, but I truly believe that supernatural force, the enemy, is less inclined to be against us when he doesn't have anything to fight us on, right? So when we are successful, when things are going good, when we're committed to church, when we're committed to God, when our relationship is thriving and growing, we're in Scripture and we're connecting with people, the enemy has something to push back against. I don't necessarily think that he cares to bump us down a few pegs when we're at the bottom of the barrel. I think he waits until we've seen success, that we've seen victory, that we've seen some wins in our life, and he says, that's when I'm going to get them. That's when I'm going to come after them. That's when insecurities begin to creep in that say, you're not good enough. That's when our vices begin to flare back up, and the things that we thought that we kicked, the things that we thought we moved past show back up, and they say, hey, remember how good life was when we were doing it together? Here's when you know it's coming. The flip side, any great hardship. Any great hardship. Temptation shows up when we face hardships, when we walk through something. Have you ever heard the phrase, when it rains, it pours, right? You ever heard the cliche, kick him when he's down, or salt in your wound? The list of cliches goes on, but they're cliches for a reason. Because when we walk through hardships, we become vulnerable. And when we become vulnerable, we swing the door wide open to temptation. We swing the door wide open to an enemy attack when we're vulnerable. No matter what angle it takes, it's crucial for our well-being, for our purity, for our sanity, for our relationship with God, for our spiritual livelihood, to figure out where it's coming from so that we have the ability to shut it down, right? Here's the second thing. How do we do it better next time? We understand the process. Or maybe I say we understand that there is a process. I think a lot of times we ignore the red flags, and sometimes we don't understand them, and a lot of times we don't see them, or maybe it's too late when the red flags show up. James goes on and he says, but each one is tempted when, by his own evil desires, he is dragged away and enticed. Then after desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin. And sin, when it's full grown, gives birth to death. James is laying out a process. This happens, and then this happens, and then this happens, and then you die, right? I walk into one of my girls' rooms yesterday, and she's sitting on the floor, and she looks up at me, and all around her, she had the worst board game that man has ever created. Do you know what it is? Mousetrap. Do y'all remember the game Mousetrap? It's funny because they have remade Mousetrap, and you buy it, it's a new version, it's not the old version, and the pieces have gotten worse, like they don't fit together properly. Like, It's like they're like, you know what, how can you take the worst game ever and make it worse, right? And so as a kid, we had Mousetrap, but we would never actually play Mousetrap. You just set up the parts. You know what I'm talking about? Like, no one has ever actually played a game of Mousetrap. You just set up the parts, you watch it happen, and then you walk away, right? So a couple years ago, my parents show up at my house, and they always come bearing gifts. My dad will literally bring a suitcase filled with nonsense. And none of it's ever for me. And so a couple years ago, they show up with this game, Mousetrap. And I said, get out of my house, right? It's a terrible game. So I walk in yesterday, and all the pieces are scattered all around her on the floor. And she looks up at me and just shrugs. And then she asked me the worst question that I can possibly think for her to ask. She said, will you help me? And I said, get out of my house. And I just turned around and walked away. Like, you're on your own, bud. And then she packaged it up, and we didn't play for the rest of the day. Here's the thing about that game. You crack the code, because it's a code that you have to crack, right? Instructions are pointless. You finally piece it together. You throw out said instructions because you're not going to play the game. It's a terrible game. But there is a process to it. And by the way, if you ever go to YouTube and look up Mousetrap, you have to include the word game. If you don't include the word game, you get a whole bunch of internet ways to catch mice. I highly recommend doing it. Seriously, I wish we had time that I could explain some of these. I'm not going to say I spent about 15 minutes on actual mouse traps, but I did. But what happens in this game is that if you can figure it out, there's a process to the mouse trap. There's a process to the structure that you build. The stop sign swings in it. And it leads to the boot, and the boot leads to the bucket, and the bucket leads to the ball, and then the ball rolls down the slide, and it goes through a series of events until what happens at the end? The mouse is caught. It goes through a process, and at the very end of the process, you're caught. Temptation leads us away. The desire grows, and it takes us to sin, and the sin takes us to death. Basically this, until we start to understand the process, we remain debilitated to the cycle until we get off of it. The Bible says the certain outcome is death. If you set up that game, there is no other outcome in doing it than a trapped mouse at the end. The only way that you can avoid it is if the process is broken. It's desire, and then it's toying with an idea, and then it's the hook, and then it's the consequence. There's a strategy, and there's a strategy for everything. If there's a strategy to bring you down, there's a strategy to bring you up, right? Hebrews chapter 4 tells us that Jesus was tempted, but he did not sin. And as a result of that, we can approach the throne of grace with confidence. We can approach the throne of grace with confidence because Jesus was tempted, but Jesus did not sin. Therefore, number 3, we need to learn to overcome. Every single thing in life, we are capable of overcoming. You ever overcame anything? It's wonderful, right? Everything is capable of being overcome. And it doesn't always feel that way, and it doesn't always look that way, right? Last summer, I tried to learn French. French beat me. Right? I had 3 or 4 really good weeks of French. If you've ever tried, does anybody speak French? Good. Terrible language. French beat me, right? Heights beat me. Onions beat me. We have our list of things that beat us. And as a result of this list of things, and those are light things, but we have real things in life. Real things that beat us down, and they take the victory in the battle. And because we have these things, we think that we're always going to have these things. Because we have this list of things that beat us, we get locked into a mindset that these things have to beat us. So we're tempted, and all of a sudden we think, well, this is my life. This is what's going to happen. I cannot beat this temptation. But James goes on. He says in verse 16, don't be deceived, my dear brothers. Every good and perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father of heavenly lights, who does not change like shifting shadows. Remember, this is right after James explains the process. James explains that there is a process, and the certain outcome of the process is death. But don't be deceived. Every good and perfect gift is from God. And God has given us this perfect gift of strength and fortitude to overcome the process. Unfortunately, instead of giving into the help, we resist the help and we become the struggle. I truly believe that we are the struggle most of the time. We face temptation and we think there's this heavy weight, this huge attack from the enemy, and sometimes that's the case. But sometimes we are the ones doing the attacking. Sometimes we are the struggle. How do we overcome? We give into the gift that God has given us, the good and perfect gift from the Father of heavenly lights that does not change. Let me ask you 3 questions and we'll wrap it up. First one is this: what are you letting go? What are you letting go? This is the identification part. Maybe a better way of saying it is, what are you allowing in your life? What are you allowing to transpire and fester in your life? What are you allowing to grow inside of your life? Maybe it's your thoughts. Maybe you've let go of the control that you have over the way your mind works. Maybe your thoughts are dictating the way that you feel in the future that's ahead of you. That your outcome is already determined for you and it's negative and you're never going to win. Maybe you're in this perpetual state of condemnation because of things that sit in your past. Maybe you're in this perpetual state of condemnation because of things that sit in your present. Maybe you're sitting in your guilt and you're sitting in your shame and you're sitting in this condemnation, and because of that condemnation, you just assume that this is what life is going to be. I think that when we start talking about temptation in church, our brains automatically go to sexual sin, and so much we think, man, that's not an issue. That's not my thing. But it's so much bigger than that. Temptation is so much bigger than that. Are you stuck complaining? Are you in a season where all you are is negative? And your temptation is you being pulled back into this negative atmosphere of your life? Are you stuck in conversations that you shouldn't be in? Are you having conversations? Are you tempted to interact with people in ways that you should not interact with people? Are you stuck in a cycle of shame? I read an article this week about shame. It was a very fascinating article. And in this article, they set up this story. And I thought I would read this story. It's brief. But I thought that it was so spot on. I love stories that paint a picture, right? That give you an image. And that's what this did. Maybe you can relate. It says, imagine yourself at a social gathering with people you recently met and whose company you enjoy. Conversation is lively. Everybody appears to be having a good time. When another guest makes a comment that reminds you of a funny story you once heard, you take advantage of the natural opening and you begin to recount it. Okay, are you with me? You paint the picture for yourself. You're at a gathering, people are chatting, somebody says something, it triggers a story in your head. Because you remember how much you laughed when you first heard the story, you look forward to sharing your enjoyment with these new friends. As you glance face to face, anticipating their laughter, you finally reach the conclusion of the story. Silence. Much like this. After a moment, somebody says, "Oh, I see, that's funny." Have you ever been there? Like you say something, "Oh, good, yeah." Still no one laughs. You suddenly feel yourself blushing as your face goes hot. You glance down and avoid making eye contact with any of the other guests. You feel briefly confused. Your thoughts unfocused and disorderly. You wish you'd never told the story and that you could disappear. When another guest changes the subject and conversation moves on, you feel relieved that the group attention has shifted, and you soon recover. No more than 7 or 8 seconds have passed since you finished your story. Isn't it interesting? Like, it really would be like 7 seconds, but it's an eternity. Right? It's an eternity. What is the name of the emotion you felt when the story fell flat? It says shame. Shame. Shame can be swapped with embarrassment, right? And it's a silly example, right? It's a relatable example. We've probably all been in that boat. Probably some of us more than others, right? But we've been in that boat, but we've experienced that type of shame. But the reality is there are much darker issues, and the darker issues that we're embarrassed of or have shame as a result of create a roadblock that prevents us from, number two, asking the question, who are you letting in? Who are you letting in? Who are you not letting in as a result of the shame and the embarrassment? This is kind of the crux of the last few weeks of teaching. That the people we're letting in make a difference. That the people we're doing life with matter. They make a difference for who we are, for what we do. We don't get to release the shame that's in the cycle of temptation until we have a structure of people that we can rely on. Until we have a structure of people in our life that we can trust, that we can allow in. And I mean actually allow inside. Allow them in here and allow them in here. People that we can trust to do that. Talked about growth groups. Growth groups start tomorrow. They've been incredible so far. I don't say it for promotion sense. I think this is going to be the best growth groups that we have ever had. I truly, truly believe that. If you've not signed up, sign up. And I know it's a lot, but there's a reason to it. And I'll get to that here in a second. But if you have signed up, let me encourage you to do two things. Number one, show up, right? You got to show up. Number two, engage in a unique way with people. Don't be unique, but engage in a unique way with people, right? We do these things for you to engage. I believe that our growth groups are twofold. Number one, so that you can engage with God on deeper levels, that you are growing spiritually, that your relationship with Christ is actually progressing. That's why we do growth groups. The second reason we do growth groups is so that you have the ability to engage with someone else. People that have the ability to connect with you and actually build something on and build something with, so that we're not doing life by ourselves. But I think it's on us. I think it's on us to take those steps. Who are you letting in that has the ability to speak into your life so that the two of you can build something, that you can progress in something? The very first problem in the world was not sin. It was solitude. The very first problem, when you go back to Genesis, was not sin. It was solitude. God is creating the world, and he creates the heavens and the earth and the land and the sea and the animals and man, and he looks at it and he says, man, this is good. Scripture says he looked at it and says, this is good. And then there's this alarming statement a couple verses later where he says, it says it's not good that man should be alone. God looks at creation and says, this is good. However, it's not good that man is alone. So he created connection. So he created a bond. The first problem was not sin, it was solitude. And God came in and added to it. We were created for bonds. Find people in your life that allow this. Good people, people that have your best interest in mind. And maybe you're here today and you're thinking, man, I've been walking this course for a long time. My relationship with Christ is booming. It's never been better. I've got people in my life. I've got people that are speaking into me. Flip the question, who's letting you in? Who's letting you in? Who do you have the ability to speak life into? If you say no one, you're missing out on key elements of this faith system that we're in. If you say I'm not qualified, get qualified, right? If the words that come out of your mouth are not life-giving, change the way you speak. Figure out who you can speak into. Here's number 3. Where are you letting God? Where are you letting God? This is what it all comes down to. Christianity is so much more than us simply trying to avoid sin. Christianity is so much more than us getting out of hell. Christianity is so much more than that. It's allowing God in so that God can do something with you. Letting God in is us literally giving everything up. It's us saying, God, you have full control over this. All of it. Every single aspect of this. And what's so cool is that when we open the door and say, God, this is all yours, God comes rushing into us. It's not a matter of us having to chase down God. God is sprinting at us. And there's biblical account after account after account of this very thing happening. You look at the prodigal son who left home, squandered away his wealth. He comes back home. His dad sees him walking down the road, and he sprints at him. He chases his son down. And it's this parable, this story that Jesus tells to represent the fact that God is chasing us down, that God will take us back no matter what. In Matthew chapter 14, the disciples are in a boat. It's late at night. They're far off of shore. And all of a sudden, Jesus comes walking out to them on water. Do you know the story? Jesus comes walking on water to the disciples. And of course, the disciples are scared because there's a person walking on the water. Right? And they think that it's a ghost. Mind you, this is hours after they were with Jesus. They know what he looks like. But they see him and they think that it's a ghost. And then Jesus reassures them that he's not a ghost. I cannot imagine that somebody's not in that boat saying, yeah, that's what a ghost would probably say, right? But then Peter calls out and he needs more confirmation. He needs reassurance. He asks Jesus, if that's you, call me out onto the water. So Jesus calls him out on the water. Peter gets out of the boat. Peter gets out of the boat and he steps onto the water. And now Peter is standing on water and he takes some steps, but he begins to doubt. And as he begins to doubt, he begins to sink. And as he begins to sink, he begins to panic. And he cries out for Jesus to save him. And Matthew says, immediately he reached out his hand and caught him. He said, Peter, why are you doubting me? How much are we so stuck in the things that hold us back, stuck in our struggles and our vices, and locked into these cycles of temptation, sin, that we forget to call out on the one who will immediately reach out his hand and grab us. That will immediately reach out and save us. Are you letting God in? Are you letting God be over the things that we lose every single time without him? There's all these things that we should be following. There's a part of this walk. Scripture gives us guidelines and instructions on how to live our best life. But at the end of the day, you look at your faults and your mistakes and your failures and your struggles and your trials and your temptations. Are you allowing God to be over the things that you will fail at without him? If temptation has overtaken you, it's because you're doing it by yourself. And we have this God who is willing to take the action steps. All we have to do is say, God, save me. God, rescue me. The God that time and time again has proven himself faithful through our battles. I want to pray with you. Jesus, thank you so much.